Yeah.
The ghost of Stalin is alive and well, and censoring any dissent against them. So
No. Yeah. There's a specter haunting Hakeem, and that specter is Stalin.
yeah, haunting the internet connections of all of us. Yeah. Okay, so I think we might be live there. Hopefully
Yeah.
that's working now. We are. Yeah. Okay, I can see we're 15 seconds into the live stream. Welcome to the stream, everybody. Today there will be blood. Tankie versus Anarkiddie fighting to the death, featuring the mighty Eron from Re-Education. Aaron, would you like to introduce yourself to our fine guests that we have in the chat here?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a bloodbath. So, my name is Aaron. I'm from the show Re-Education. Program where I talk about different sort of leftist ideas. Sometimes we talk about theory. Sometimes we talk about praxis. And usually I try to motivate my audience to get out into the real world, get active, and try to change things as much as they can, because the only real change that we can have in the world is the change that you make for yourself. So that's kind of what I do. And yeah, you can check out my channel at youtube.com/, searching Re-Education, you'll likely find me.
Yeah, and if that doesn't work, then you can find a link to the channel just directly below this in the description box of this video. So a little shortcut there. I think you'll probably find the Twitter and a couple of other little some of your social media links there. But yeah, no, I have to say that's one of the things that I really, really appreciate about your channel. You're not just sitting around, just talking theory. You're actually telling people to get active, to get organized. You're dealing with the real issues. You know, you're making change happen, and I really, really appreciate seeing that. I think recently, you know, you even had a video about things like activist burnout and stuff like that, and that's something that I've experienced pretty badly in 2018 after the repeal the Eighth Amendment campaign in Ireland. You know, for abortion rights in Ireland. I was just completely just wiped out. I couldn't do a single thing. And so, yeah, well, you know, Aaron, if I'd had your video back then for how to deal with activist burnout, things would have been a lot smoother, I suppose.
I suppose so. A lot of the advice that I give is kind of like the stuff that I either would tell for that they're very active, and I tried to give that as a bit of advice, but most of the time it's like me trying to learn something or figure something out, and then at the end of my research I kind of jump onto a video and try to explain it as good as I possibly can, because I'm just as much going through this journey as any one of my viewers. So usually when I have something good, I'll be like, hey, you know what, that's a good argument, that's a good idea, I'll try to make that into I've done a couple of those now, and usually it comes while I'm driving out into the middle of the bush, and I start getting like I don't know, deep and stuff like that, and I'm like, you know what, this is what can probably help people.
Best place to
Go out and
start.
rub some sticks together, start a fire. That'll make you feel a little bit better.
It's fantastic. You know, it's really cool that, you know, you mentioned that how it's something that you'll be studying and then you'll pass on that. You know, you're teaching what you know, which is fantastic. And I often think that, you know, one of the best ways of learning something is to teach it. You know, and that's really, really helpful, because that's how you know you actually know something sort of back to front, and it can really help you to sort of toss ideas back and forth, and maybe you thought you understood something, but then somebody maybe pokes a little hole in your theory. You know, I've done that before, where I've made a video and I thought I understood something, and then I'll just notice I'll get like a comment, and
Mm-hmm.
they'll be talking about it from a completely different perspective, and I'll be just like, oh shit.
Oh
well,
yeah.
I've already put this up now, so I suppose I kind of need to stick to my guns. But that's also a really bad attitude. I should probably just say, "Oh shit, sorry, I was wrong." But that's not something that
Oh
we,
yeah. Well, and that's the thing, right? Is
yeah,
well, as YouTubers, it's hard to do, and
really
whenever
hard.
you admit that you're wrong on the internet, now all of a sudden you're wrong forever. But
Yes.
as a human being, I think that that's the most important part of growing and of learning. And that sort of thing is when you are confronted with and actually doing this, when you're confronted with evidence or with an argument,
Mm.
you have to reevaluate the things that you thought and then change your mind, and not just pay lip service to and just say that you do that,
Yeah.
because that's that doesn't change anything at all.
Yeah.
But you have to actually be willing to make that actual jump and make that change in your thought process.
Yeah.
I've had to do that a lot of times, and I don't care if I end up being wrong. That's the best thing that I could possibly be, because afterwards I can become right, and
Yeah,
the most
exactly.
important thing to me is being right. So
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's always that sort of dialectical process of development, and it's really great to see. And I love seeing political development of people, especially in like social media spaces. It sort of demonstrates like a real humility. I think it's very humanizing to see someone come forward and say, actually, I've updated my ideas, I've updated my perspective on such and such an issue, and it's very, very humanizing, and very, very nice to see. Although I will say it's actually I think it's quite hard to do in our spaces, because when you have an audience who sort of agreed with you on a certain point that maybe you put across at some point in the past, and then you kind of come out like a couple of months later and you're like, actually, I think I was kind of wrong about that and I disagree. Well, that's gonna kind of maybe throw off some other members of your audience. And like I had that at a certain stage. Like I remember when I came out explicitly as Marxist Leninist on my channel, it was kind of a process of development. Like I started my channel and before I started the channel, I was in a Trotskyist organization, and I was just quite eclectic with my socialism. I didn't really have a set ideology. I sort of drifted into maybe sort of an anarcho-curious kind of thing around the time I was starting my channel. And then I eventually sort of settled on Marxism Leninism, and as soon as I did that, I noticed that like my Patreon supporters just fucking plummeted. And I was like, oh shit, I should just kept my mouth
oh
shut.
no.
Yeah, and yeah. So there is almost like an incentive to just fucking stay in the same position, and more people are getting attracted to you who have the same views and the same beliefs and same ideas that you have, and so they're constantly reinforcing those ideas, and so. We sort of come into this and we don't really want to be in like an echo chamber, or if we do want an echo chamber, we want to be increasing the size of the echo chamber, maybe getting more people into it. We want to grow the bubble,
Yeah.
but sometimes that's not necessarily happening, and so we constantly need to be sort of doing that sort of self-criticism, and challenging ourselves and challenging each other in a friendly and warm and comradely kind of way, and I think that's hopefully some stuff we're gonna like do like that today, and I'm sorry to everybody in the audience. There's not gonna be blood. we should just we should just be honest about that straight away. This is gonna be a friendly, wholesome stream here today.
Yeah, it's going to be like listening to Mr. Rogers of the two most radical ideologies in oh,
Exactly, exactly.
I just want to touch on quickly about what you were saying. What you're talking about is something that Angie Speaks and I had discussed before. Is it's a validation cycle,
Yes.
right? When you say something, that can validate your audience. Your audience then agrees with that thing, and they will show you that they agree with you by giving you whatever it is, likes,
Yep.
comments, money through Patreon. And that validates you and makes you believe that what you were continues, right? And that's how a lot of us end up down that path where we say or believe things that aren't something that we actually believe.
Yeah.
Because the audience is a huge contributing factor to the way that we respond and the way that we believe things ourselves.
Yeah.
So that's why I almost think that it's important to listen to the praise from your audience, but I think it's more important to listen to the criticism, those minor criticisms from your audience.
Yeah.
There to listen to you, while that small criticism, they're maybe not there to listen to you, but maybe they're the ones that have an actual, like a really good opinion that you need to hear.
Definitely, especially good faith criticism, because there's always going to be trolls and dickheads, who are going to try and mess with you. But like,
yeah.
But definitely, if someone has some thoughtful, well thought out, good faith criticism that they want to sort of send in your direction, and and if you're available to do that, obviously you're not always going to be able to. We all have lives, we're all busy, we all do this and that and the other. But if you're able, then it can be very, very useful in terms of your own political development and in many other ways. So. Just to help some people in the audience in the chat, just to let them know about the sort of the format today. As always with these streams, we generally do, I'll ask one question to the guests, and then I'll take a few questions from the people in the chats, and that can be towards myself, towards the guest, towards Aaron here. If you do have any questions directly for us, then I would ask that you just, in the chat box, just type in @PaulMoran, and then I'll know that the question is directly for us, and I won't think that you're asking somebody in the chat, you know, about X, Y, or Z or something like that. Okay, so I think we'll probably jump directly into it now, and with the basic question that I generally start by asking people. And so, Conrad, why did you start your YouTube channel?
Yeah, so I was okay. So in my country, there was a lot of terrible things that were going on. Obviously, I could see that there was going to be an economic recession. There was all kinds of job loss, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Onto the streets. This is during the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vest movement. And they started putting on their little yellow vesties and they started getting into the street here in my hometown. And I thought that that was absolutely fantastic until a couple of days later, when they started to be subverted or infiltrated or whatever by some local neo-Nazi gangs. Very quickly, the yellow vest movement here either started off or started to become very right-leaning, and this horrified me because the only thing that I could think of right was like the thing that we need to do is we need to get out in the streets, we need to do some sort of action, we need to get our yellow vests on, we need to do what the people in Paris are doing because things are terrible. And then when that started happening, but it started to become all about race and it started all about deporting certain immigrants and that sort of thing. Like I said, I was horrified. So I went online. I don't know if I was fully anarchist yet, but I was extremely leftist. And I started looking online for like, how do you do a revolution? Right? Like how do I find some information on this?
Good.
Like it's the fucking internet, man. We got to have a step-by-step manual that we can just go through and it'll tell us exactly how to do it. And I couldn't find anything like that anywhere. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. I can't find it on YouTube. Then I'm going to go digging deeper. So root of theory and looking at successful revolutions of the past. And I stumbled on some Maoist theory and some anarchist theory and that sort of thing, specifically the mass line. And once I found that information, I immediately thought that I had hit the gold mine, and I was like, okay, this is perfect. I just need to explain this to people and get it out there and get this information to the people who need to see it. So I got as active as I possibly could. Group that I could all across Western Canada, like all the way from Vancouver to the middle of the country. I tried to get a hold of everybody. And I got a hold of a lot of people, but all of the leftist groups that I got a hold of here, unfortunately, were either too small to do anything, or some of them were too liberal to want to do anything. I did a couple of speaking engagements with a few different groups. I got in a bunch of different organizations who were connected with union leaders and organizers all across Canada and that sort of thing. And I hit a brick wall like crazy. It was like every time I got to a certain point, every time I got to the higher elements of each one of these groups, I would immediately be stonewalled, and nobody wanted to listen to how to do any of the activism that I was talking about. Grant, some young upstart with bright eyes come in and tell everybody, hey, what you're doing is wrong, we need to do everything this way. But I felt like they had gotten so used to I don't mean to be rude, but I feel like they got so used to losing over the years and so used to just not being effective that they started falling into these liberal traps where they just continued to do things that were unproductive. Something that I brought up many times on my channel was at one point when the they instituted something known as a clown count. Now, a clown count is basically the idea that every single one of those yellow vests that show up, the neo-Nazis, some group is going to donate a small amount of money to the local charity. What was it? Planned Parenthood. They're going to donate it to the local Planned Parenthood. Well, that's fantastic, but every single time that they're donating $1, that's another person that the right has on the streets that's going to be able to get more people involved and invest dollars. They're counting bodies, and eventually they're going to have so many people that it doesn't matter how much we donate to Planned Parenthood, they could just get rid of it by force if they wanted to. So I thought that more direct action needed to be taken. I thought that we needed to actually do something immediately. And after being stonewalled by a lot of different groups, I said, you know what? I already know how to do YouTube. I've been doing this for a long time. I can do speaking and stuff like that. Or else I'm going to burn myself out, and I'm going to just keep. So I changed my entire YouTube persona, which was like a comedy cartoon show, to a far left, radically decent like set of programming where I tried to educate people on the theory that I had learned. And yeah, now we're here.
I'm delighted to hear that you're here. It's interesting that you talked about the yellow vests as well. You talked about the yellow vests being sort of co-opted by these sort of right-wingers and all sorts of stuff. And that's exactly what happened in Ireland as well. Unfortunately, it just became sort of a front for the sort of the burgeoning far right that we have in Ireland at the moment, which is still very small, so it's not like a real threat or anything like that. But it definitely did get co-opted by the far right, and it seems like that's happening all over the world.
Oh yeah, and you know what? That happens not only sporadically and spontaneously, but it also happens by design. Like, don't think for a second that a lot of these different groups that take control of left being pushed somehow by some sort of organization. It's within every single elite's best interest to make sure that these sorts of groups don't get off the ground and that their messaging is changed immediately. And that's why you see a lot of groups get co-opted by liberal organizations. You can see that, for example, Chaz. They immediately get co-opted by liberal organizations who are more interested in the aesthetics of revolution. Or they can be co-opted by right-wing groups, sometimes paid off by multinational corporations and stuff like that, to take over left-wing groups. And we've seen that all across the world and all across history. That was part of, well, one of many reasons that Yugoslavia ended up falling apart. So, yeah, never discredit the amount of fuckery that these people do.
Yeah, hit the nail on the head there. Absolutely. Great. We just had a little message for you from Jack Attack LP. They said, love to see this. Tell Aaron Jack says hi, and I'll be streaming soon myself. Would love to talk to you both when I start. Trans rights and solidarity. Maybe you know this? Do you know this Jack person? Hello?
Sorry, Paul. You dropped right out, and I can't hear what you're saying.
Oh,
just
sorry.
Give it 1 second. Maybe we'll catch up here.
Sorry, comrade. Can you hear me now? Am I gone?
You dropped out right as that question began.
I'm sorry. This always happens when we get to the good stuff. So you can hear me now, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so we had Jack Attack LP, JACATAC LP, said, love to see this. Tell Aaron Jack says hi, and I'll be streaming soon myself. Would love to talk to you both when I start. Trans rights and solidarity. Good message.
Awesome. Trans rights. Yeah, and absolutely. Give me a shout. Go ahead and DM me on Twitter. I try to answer as many questions and do all that kind of thing as I can. So, yeah, definitely set it up.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much, comrade. Okay, fantastic. So let me just see. I do see a pretty inflammatory question here.
I love those.
this is a pretty inflammatory one. There, like this is a question that's trying to stoke division between ML and anarchism. It's about Nestor Makhno, so I suppose like the Black Army and all that. So maybe we'll return to that a little bit later. Because otherwise
Sure.
we're getting right into history and like deaths and all this really heavy stuff. So maybe we'll return to that one a little bit later.
Yeah,
Tank Funk, but
sure.
yeah, you gotta appreciate people trying to stoke division between us. Always dividing the left, Tank Funk. Why you gotta do that to us?
I know. Yeah, what's going on? We're
We're
turning ourselves. We're like capitalists to ourselves.
exactly. We're serving the imperialists here. Anyway, okay, so Conrad, you touched on this a little bit.
Exactly.
You touched on this a little bit already, but would you mind describing your political development? I think there's a much longer story there, and I think that maybe you said that you were sort of maybe adjacent to some right-wing spaces when you were younger, and so I'd be really interested to hear how you came to the left generally and what attracted you to anarchism in particular. And I noticed that you also mentioned
Yeah, absolutely.
you mentioned
Oh,
Maoism
sorry.
and you mentioned Maoism as well, which is very, very interesting as well. So I'm really interested to hear your political developments and how that happened over the years.
Sure. Yeah, and you did drop out a little bit at the end there, but I think I understood what you said. It basically explained my development and
Yeah,
also how that had to do with Maoism and stuff like that.
yeah,
Basically, right?
perfect. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So, and I've explained this a few times before. So, any of the people that are in my audience, you probably have heard this a few times. I started off basically active at all, or not act, but politically knowledgeable at all.
Mm,
I started off very hard. It might have had something to do with my family being very right wing,
mm,
and my parents being more or less, well, not parents, but parent being more or less racist and that sort of thing.
mm,
Um, so I started off really quite right wing, and I started falling in with a lot of different, very right neo-Nazi groups and that sort of thing, skinheads,
mm.
um, and we got involved in a lot of really bad stuff. Like we did graffiti and vandalism and all kinds of mischief and arsons and that sort of stuff. Not saying that I necessarily did any of that,
You
but
might not.
not saying that I didn't either. We're on a stream right now, so I'm not going to say what I did or didn't do, but I
You
know
just
that a
did
lot of
them
that kind of
in a
stuff
video
did
game.
happen.
Just in a video
And
game. That's all.
yeah, it started, exactly, yeah, and it started getting like pretty heated. So and there was also vandalism of churches and a bunch of other things like that. So uh, I believed a lot of really bad, crazy stuff about race, about ethnicities, about skin color, that sort of thing.
Mm,
And it wasn't really until I got out into the workforce and had to start working with people in high school.
mm,
Uh, it wasn't until that period of my life when I really started to realize that everybody was more or less equal. Maybe not financially, but at least we're all born with a certain amount of equality. It doesn't matter what color your skin is, or where you're from, or what your religion is. We're all good people. So that started to move me a little bit left. And then also other things as well, like listening to George Carlin and The Daily Show with
mm.
Jon Stewart. Fairly liberal at the time, since I was a pretty hardcore right winger. It was nice to hear a counter narrative to the one that I'm always hearing about how, well, at the time it was either George Bush or whoever was a good guy, or So it was good to hear like a counter narrative
Mm-hmm.
to those sorts of things. And over time, that started pushing me further and further left until, of course, Bernie Sanders, the Turks, surprisingly, and then the introduction of Bernie Sanders. I believe like whatever it was, 2014, 2015. That really started pushing me over the line past capitalism, because up until that point, like many people,
Mm.
I never knew anything other than liberal capitalism, right? Like it
Mm.
was 100% capitalist realism in my life. And when I started to hear a critique, click, right? Like,
Mm.
for example, I started hearing about how the businessmen and all of these people were actually in control. And up until that point, I always heard that it was just a conspiracy theory. But I remember George Carlin always talking about that. And I
Mm.
thought it was a funny joke at the time. But then I was like, oh, damn. Oh,
Yeah.
damn, he was right.
Oh shit.
And then like,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And like everything started falling into place. And then I found Richard Wolff and started looking into worker cooperatives and stuff like that,
Mm.
which led me down a rabbit hole of YouTubers. And also uh, you know, watched a lot of liberal SJW stuff back in the day as well.
Mm.
And yeah, and that basically led me to being an extreme radical that really, really wants human rights and equality. So yeah, that's basically how that happened.
It's fantastic. Like I can't believe that YouTube had such a strong effect on you and like in the media and stuff like that. You know, especially when you had
Mhm.
friend like you actually had friends and you were in sort of these groups of right wingers. So it's it's shocking. It's shocking to me to hear that YouTubers are actually able to have this sort of impact on people. Because I don't know. I don't. Do you ever feel like what we're doing here is just kind of
Dropping out this bad when I was talking. I'm sorry, but you're
sorry.
dropping out real hard here.
Oh, sorry. When you were talking, it was fine. It was coming through, so don't worry. Can you hear me
Oh,
now?
that's good.
Yeah,
A
you're
little
right.
bit.
Okay, yeah,
Okay, yeah. Let's try again. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. All I said was that basically it's great that you were able to be radicalized by people on YouTube, and surprising that people on YouTube had such a massive effect on you. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us can probably relate to that in some way, shape, or form as well.
Hmm.
Brilliant. Okay, so
Yeah.
we have a question here in the chat, which I might take. I do want to ask you maybe about your sort of sub ideology, like if you have like a specific kind of ideology. But would you like to take a question from the chat first, or will we jump back into that after? What would you prefer?
Yeah. Well, yeah. We'll do the
Hmm.
to the other questions.
Okay. Sorry, you just cut out there slightly. Which would you
Oh,
prefer?
okay. We'll take the question from the chat.
Okay, cool. So we have a question here. Tank Punk is asking.
Oh
Uh,
no.
Here we go. This one isn't as inflammatory. This one's thoughts on
Okay.
Fidel, Mao, and Kim Il Sung. Do you want to take that?
Okay.
Would you like to take that first?
What? Oh, my thoughts
Your thoughts?
on Mao, Fidel, and Kim Il Sung.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Good, bad, indifferent.
So on Mao, oh, both, neither. I don't believe, like, when you're saying good and bad, like it really depends on the person and what they're like, the time period in their life, the intentions that they had. Like, yeah, that's a really difficult one. Mao, like, they all did great things and they all did horrible things.
Hmm.
Um, and Ollie, because that's the one that I know the most about.
Hmm.
He was a very, very interesting and complex character.
Hmm.
He started off, I would say, very close to, if not fully, like leaning towards libertarianism, more or
Hmm.
less anarchism,
That's right. Yeah.
with a lot of the ideas that he had, with a lot of the praxis that he wanted to get involved in. But he existed at a time that was extremely war torn, right?
Hmm.
His country had just fallen apart. Monarch, I believe it was something like 40 years before he took power, the monarchy had fallen, leaving the entire country in complete disarray. There was warlordism, there was
Hmm.
factionalism of all kinds. There was a certain amount of nationalism, whether or not it was good or bad, I'll leave
Hmm.
that to the history to decide. But
Hmm.
they didn't even have control over everything, and it turned to just basically like a bloodbath. Not the entire time, but for a lot of the time,
Hmm.
and Japan. And the Sino-Japanese War lasted for a very long time, and that had them fighting against not only each other, because before that they had a civil war, but
Mm.
they were also fighting the invading Japanese as well. Um, so Mao had to take up a lot of different ideas and a lot of different strategies so he could actually gain control. And something that you're saying just before the show is that maybe when certain individuals are backed into a corner, like authoritarian leaning starts to really shine through, and maybe you
Mm.
feel like a caged animal and you need to act and you need to act in a way that is immediate, right? And
Mm.
the way that we understand immediate action, uh, the way that we've been taught that through 1,000 years is through authoritarianism,
Mm.
getting people in line by disciplining them.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah,
put
I
them
get
up
what you
against the
said. Yeah.
wall if they don't want to listen.
Yeah, absolutely. Just snap your fingers. We gotta fucking do this. People are attacking us. We
I,
need
I would
fight
say,
away. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, yeah, and going through the complicated process of democratizing everything sometimes,
Mm.
seems like it takes too much fucking time,
Mm.
and I hear that argument, right? So, I think that Mao started off as a very sympathetic character. He was a very interesting person, and he did a lot of great things off the bat. And then I think after starting to lean more authoritarian, I think wanted to take more power, and maybe if not him, then the people that came in after him certainly did. Um, and it started to corrupt the ideology, because something that I always say when it comes to this sort of thing is that when absolute power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and when you have an individual that is given the opportunity to hold that power, even if that person is 100% perfect and 100% pure and could never ever be corrupted, they're all of that power. And as soon as they leave, the next person that comes into that position might not be as pure, it might not be as amazing, and will inevitably use that power that they have to gain more power. And I think that's what happened with Mao, or maybe at least after Mao's death. I also think that's what happened with a lot of the Soviet leadership. Um, and I think that it has to do with the idea of the end basis for, or sorry, the means being the basis for the ends. So when
Mm.
you start your revolution off doing authoritarian things, when you start your revolution off doing things like slaughtering the innocents because they're the enemy, and or when you um, do things like that, right? When you have dictatorship rather than leadership,
Mm.
then eventually those means will become the ends, and your revolution, when it succeeds, will end the dictatorship, that sort of thing, the grasp for power ends up just flourishing at the end rather than going away. And that's why I think that a lot of socialist countries have such a hard time actually making the transition from socialism to full on communism, because to do that, they would have to abolish their permanent organization of power, which by this point has set it up so that they can continue to exist. Yeah, so that's basically my figures mentioned. Very similar
Mm.
situations. They were attacked by a lot of different capitalist powers, and they had to act aggressively. And yeah, so were they all evil? No, I don't think that they were all evil. Were they all great guys and we should stand them and ooh woo and all that kind of thing? No, I don't think that we should necessarily do that too. But we can learn a lot of things from these people, and we can use what they can teach us to make sure that where we go with our revolution, if there is to be one, action.
Yeah, I think that was really great, and it's great that you are willing to sort of look at the good and to say, like, well, look, this worked, maybe that didn't work, and take what works and move on from that, and roll with it. And I really appreciate that you have like embraced things like the masked lion and stuff like that. It does show sort of an openness and a willingness to be flexible and to adapt to new information and new situations and stuff like that. So I really really appreciate that, and I think that's really really important. And look, nobody is going to look back and say absolutely everything that Mao did or Stalin did or anyone, whatever, it was like perfect, but there were good things, and we need to look at those good things. And I suppose we need to get away from this kind of culture of just throwing away people just because they did one bad thing or 100 bad things. Like they might have done some good things which are worth taking note of. And yeah, that was really really great. My own personal opinions is that Fidel Castro was amazing. I adore Fidel Castro. I really appreciate that, as we've emphasized here throughout the stream, he was willing to look back at moments in his life and say, I fucked up. I shouldn't have done this. He, especially, you might have noticed this with like LGBTQ plus rights. He actually atoned for that basically at a later stage in his life, and apologized for maybe making things a lot more difficult for LGBTQ plus people. At the beginning of the revolution and so on and so forth. So I really appreciate that. Mao did a lot of fantastic work, some bad stuff. Later on, I think things got a little bit dodgy, but especially early on, I think he was fantastic and instrumental, of course, in bringing about the PRC and what we have today. And Kim Il Sung as well. Yeah, absolutely critical support. I wouldn't necessarily agree with the ideologies that would come to be in the DPRK, Juche and things like that. I think it's fundamentally an idealist deviation from Marxism-Leninism, purely due to the fact that it rejects class as being the driving force of history. Rather, they would say that men and their ideas are the driving force of history. So this is fundamentally anti-materialist, metaphysical, and so I would have that criticism of it. But then again, I would of course support the DPRK against imperialism, and I would obviously support their right to self-determination and all those sorts of things. So that's generally how I would feel about those comrades. So fantastic, Aaron. Let's return back to the political ideology a little bit. And just for the people in the chat, people are asking about like left unity and stuff like that. We are going to address the question of left unity a little bit later on in the stream, so don't worry, we will come to that. But for the time being, Aaron, would you mind telling us maybe your particular ideology? I mean, would you describe yourself as like an anarcho-communist, or is there a specific tendency within anarchism that you would maybe most closely identify with?
Yeah, absolutely. So I tell everybody in my audience that I'm an anarcho-communist because I believe that those are the two, I guess, ideologies or whatever that you want to call them, that are the easiest for me to define and explain. Did I drop out? Are you still there?
No, you're good. You're good. Continue.
Okay. Yeah. So so they're the have the easiest time defining and explaining, and I also know that they have a very long, very interesting history that kind of works to criticize the mainstream. And if you know anything about me personally, but people online probably don't, but any of my friends in real life, they know that I love watching movie reviews and critical analyses of things, and like I love seeing things broken down into their smallest pieces and explained. That's just something that I absolutely love doing. And myself, an anarcho-communist, really does that sort of thing. So I'll define it and then I'll talk about why I think that is. Anarcho-communism is anarcho, the abolishment or the stripping away of all unnecessary or unjustified hierarchies, and communism, for everybody already knows, is basically the worker control and ownership of the means of production. Communism, for the most part, has to do with the worker's relation to the means of production. I personally believe that you can't look at economics without looking at an exploiter-exploited relationship. And you can't look at it without a power dynamic as well. And not to say that Marxism or communists or socialists or anything like that don't look at those sorts of things.
Mm.
But I think that it's one of the most critical, most important things to pay attention to because, excuse me, when we're talking about our relation to case of Marx or whatever, what are we actually talking about? Are we talking about people actually owning the means of production?
Mm.
Yes, but are we actually talking about something that's deeper than that? I think that we are. I think that whenever it comes to race, class, all of these things, it really comes down to not only the means of production, but the hierarchies that are involved within that, and the power dynamic that exists and the people who don't, because that's what we're talking about essentially. People
Mm.
have more power because they own the means of production.
Mm.
If that's the case, then getting rid of the means of production, or not, sorry, democratizing the means of production,
Mm.
is a way to solve that problem. So that's basically why I believe in anarcho-communism. And like I was saying a moment ago, if you know anything about me, I really like breaking things down. I really like analysis. I really like movies and stuff like, or movie reviews and stuff like that. And full revolutions were happening throughout history with Lenin and with China and all of these places. There was always that critical voice in the background of the movie reviewer guy, right? The anarchist saying,
Mm.
"Yes, you created a good movie, but here are all the plot holes. Let's talk about how this thing and this thing and this thing happened that resulted in the result that you ended up having."
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And
MLs and Marxists say is that, oh well, oh sorry, go ahead.
no, 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 you go ahead. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, I was just going to say is a lot of MLs and Marxists and stuff like that. The argument that they have is that there are very few actual functioning anarchist societies throughout history, and I would agree with that. There were very few, but just because there were very few doesn't mean that they didn't have good ideas. And at the very beginning of capitalism, it started off in just a very places and expanded and ballooned to be the geogold. So everything starts out small, and I think that we can use what we learned to make a better socialism, Marxism or communism as applied to 2020, as
Mm.
opposed to Marxism as applied to Russia or China or Ireland or whatever it is.
Mm. Yeah, really, really good points there, and I really, really appreciate the in-depth analysis of these situations, and of course, as you said, not only looking at the negatives, but also looking at the positives and getting a balanced perspective of all these things. And yeah, no, I really, really appreciate that because I think that's a much more charitable reading than a lot of non-ML leftists or right winger. Everyone, basically nobody, nobody will look at like the USSR and talk about how they raised life expectancy by 65%, or they increased real income by 370%,
Mm-hmm.
or they eliminated homelessness, or eliminated unemployment, or eliminated the gender pay gap and achieved full literacy, and all of these incredible things. They just talk about the gulags. They just talk about the purges. They just
Yep.
talk about Holodomor. They just talk about all those things. And these are all things that do need to be discussed, absolutely. But of course, we need to look at these critically, look at the pros and the cons, look at things dialectically, and don't sort of fall into the trap of believing necessarily one narrative or the other, because there's a lot more to these things than probably we're led to believe, maybe from both sides.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and I don't talk really about the gulags, and I don't
No,
talk
you
about
don't.
the
Yeah, that's right.
but I don't do that for a reason, right? Everybody else has already talked about that stuff to death. Let's talk
Mm,
about the things that we don't know, right? Let's talk
yeah.
about the re-education sort of as a joke and sort of somewhat seriously, because we
Yeah.
need to re-educate ourselves. What we've been taught is complete and utter propaganda. And it goes it's almost every single news article that you read is completely devoid of context. It's completely taken out. And
Mm,
we need to re-educate ourselves in the way that the world has actually been, and not just going by the narrative of the people who won the wars and who are able to basically write the history
mm.
books.
Yeah, exactly. The winners went write the history books and all that. So yeah, really, really important point. Okay, fantastic. So let's just have a little look in the chat and see if there are any questions here, any good faith questions. Oh, here's a good one from Beremans, actually directed towards you, Aaron. Aaron, Beremans was wondering whether Aaron, as a former right winger, has any advice on how to debate right wingers or convert them to leftism. So how do we convert the chuds and so on? Any thoughts, Aaron?
Yeah, the best way to convert anybody is to. Oh, sorry, you dropped out, and I thought that you had finished.
No, no,
Carry on.
that's perfect. Go ahead, just jump into it. How do we convert them?
So the first thing is we can't jump into it assuming that these people are stupid or that they are ignorant or anything like that. They very well might be. But a great way to jump at any of these situations is not necessarily to treat these people, pull their arguments, and try to explain things the best way that you possibly know how. The thing about talking to anybody or convincing anybody of anything is that you can't actually just spout a bunch of things, say whatever it is, talking about dialectical materialism and blah, blah, blah. You can't just tell a bunch of people what to believe. They have to come to those conclusions on their own. So whenever you're talking to somebody, you have to give them a certain amount of leeway with what they're saying. You have to terrible and horrible and they don't make much sense. You have to sort of suss through it and find the parts that you can agree with, disagree with the parts that you can't, and try to work your way into some sort of conversation rather than a full-on debate. Very few people learn from a full-on debate. They usually go into either the fight or flight response. Fight,
Yeah.
flight, or freeze, actually.
Yep, exactly.
You're in that situation, you're not aggressing towards in a verbal way as being good faith or anything like that. You see them as a lion in the jungle that's trying to attack you, because that's what our basic brain is telling us that we have to think. So you aren't usually going to come up with the most logical thing. You're not going to be open to thinking critically or trying to talk or trying to change your mind on anything. Because when you go into a conversation with somebody, as you are hoping that they are willing to change their opinions as well. So yeah, when you go into a conversation with literally anybody, that's where you have to start off. And when you talk to right wingers specifically, the best avenues that I've found is they usually hate the government, but also side with the government for a bunch of things, and it's confusing. So when they start siding with the government, I usually like to throw in the little line of something along the lines of, whoa, you're very trusting of your government, and it'll all of a sudden snap back into reality, and they're like, hey, wait a second, I don't like the government. So it's kind of a good in to get people. Usually with right wingers, you can get them through the anti-establishment angle. And usually, or Epstein, that's a great way too.
Yeah.
With liberals, you can usually get to them through sort of more, what would you call that? So social based things like race and an avenue to talk to a liberal.
Absolutely, and
Yeah.
a really, really good answer. And actually, Beremans even said, "Aaron, great answer. Really appreciate it." So you're getting love for that one there.
Nice.
Okay, awesome. Fantastic. Now, will we go ahead and jump into sort of the meat of the conversation here? We're going to talk a little bit about the differences between libertarian socialism and authoritarian socialism. What are the similarities and what are the differences? So, do you want to get started? Maybe we can talk about some similarities and then talk about some differences after. Would you like to start, or should I jump in? What would you prefer, Aaron?
You jump in. I love the soft sound of your voice.
Thanks, comrade. I'm working on it. I'll keep it nice and low and sultry.
Just silky.
Yeah, I'm embarrassed now. I'm blushing. You know, I had to take a few, I had to take a few notes of this because I don't wanna mess this up. You know, this is an important conversation to be had. You know, so I think there's two massive similarities here. You know, and the first one is we're all progressive. We all want to move forward historically. You know, we all share the values of being opposed to all kinds of oppression and exploitation, such as racism, sexism, LGBTQ phobia, ableism, etc., and of course, class exploitation. Now, that's absolutely massive that we all agree on that, you know? And I would say that another key point of agreement that we would have in terms of similarities is that we all want eventually a stateless, classless society where we can all live in that world of abundance, right? The only real difference is, of course, how do we get there? How do we get to that point? Now, maybe you'll disagree. I've heard some people disagreeing with that they don't necessarily want communism, but I think maybe we're talking about a different kind of anarchist, probably not the anarcho-communism that you're discussing. But what do you think? Do you think that there are fair similarities, and do you have some more that maybe you can think of?
Oh no, yeah, those are absolutely fair similarities. We are more similar than we are different,
Mm,
and I would honestly really sit any right winger, well, not any, but a lot of right wingers down. And I know this because I'm surrounded by them
mm,
constantly. And you ask them about, do you think that it's fair that such and such a person is born in such a way that they don't have this or that, blah, blah, blah.
mm,
They'll usually agree with you, right? But
mm.
the problem is that they've been propagandized to for so long to vote against their best interests. But yeah, when it comes to the leftist ideologies, we are so unbelievably similar that it's sickening. It's gross. We're basically
Yeah.
twins.
Yeah.
Really, it is. You know what? The main differences, and we'll talk about them specifically in a bit
Yeah.
once we talk about the similarities, but the main
Mm.
differences, most of the time, come down to definitional disagreements. And
Yes.
that's the biggest, like the saddest thing that everything has to do with. But as far as similarities go, yeah, we're very similar when it comes to wanting all people, all working people to be equal. We're very similar when it comes to the at the end of all of this, very similar when it comes to almost every single leftist ideology. We're still leftists, right?
Mm.
So we need to. Here's the thing, right? In life, we always pay attention to the negative, and I think that it's
Always.
because the negative usually takes more work to get yourself out of than the positive. Sometimes positivity does take a little bit of work, right?
Mm.
But think of every negative experience you've had. Maybe you lost your job. Maybe you lost your house. It happens. You have to work so hard to get out of that negative situation that it seems like that negative situation is all encompassing and you
Mm.
completely forget about all of the positives, right? But those
Mm.
positives have always been there and they always still are there, but it usually is just under the radar because you don't think about it, because sometimes, most of the time, the positive times come really quite easily, right? You go to the
Mm.
beach, you hang out with your friends, you write an essay that you really enjoyed, you watch some kind of comedy TV show, massive, but such good times that it doesn't make a lasting impact on your heart, right? And that's the
Mm.
same sort of thing when it comes to these ideological disagreements that we have, is that a lot of the good things that we have and a lot of the things that we agree with are easy. Of course, we agree that Black people shouldn't be treated as lesser. Of course, we agree that people should have health care as a right and not a privilege. Of course, we agree in all of these things, but that's easy. What's hard is all of the points of contention that we hit. It takes fighting, that takes all of this aggression.
Yeah.
And when we've done that, it all of a sudden leaves this taste in our mouths as though this person is evil. While they're not really evil, they just have a difference of opinion on a few small things.
Mm.
And most of the time, they're going to be fighting on your side. So that's why I think it's so important that we work together and try to pay more attention to the good things that we agree with rather than the bad things that we don't, even though some of those bad things are extremely important.
Mm. Absolutely, yeah, and really, really good take in there, and I feel nice and wholesome after hearing that, nice and warm. So that's a sort of a nice way of leading into maybe some of the differences that we would have, and you know, for me, I think there's kind of just three big differences, and we might want to take each one kind of piece by piece, and then we can sort of give our own perspectives on them. And if you want to add anything, then just feel free to jump in. The first difference I would say
Sure.
is maybe the definition of the state that we use. I think that's a big one. I would say another difference would be the definition of socialism that we use. And I think the third one would probably be the implementation of historical materialism within our analysis. And of course, that's some anarchists and some anarcho-communists will use that and implement that within their analysis. But generally, I think those are more Marxist-Leninist style things. So, do you want to maybe take this like piece by piece, and we can talk about them? We'll jump off. We'll get into the state first. So do you want to start and maybe give like an anarcho-communist perspective on what the state is, what it's used for, and then maybe I can jump in and give the ML perspective on what the state is and what that's used for?
Yeah, absolutely. So typically, when an anarchist is talking about the state, they're talking about a centralized body that has a monopoly on power. Usually, this has to do with some sort of dictatorship, or it can even be a liberal form of what do you call it? A liberal democracy form of government, or an oligarchy, or whatever it is. But typically, it has to do with a centralized organization power, or at least legislative power, over the vast majority of the people, and a monopoly on force. So they are the ones that have the military, they're the ones that have the police, they're the ones that are able to basically enforce their will on the general population. And we see that as a bad thing because most part, we don't believe that a centralized organization know how to actually take care of an entire country when there are so many small individual facets that can be left out that aren't paid attention to, like potholes in a road, or like getting certain resources distributed in certain ways to certain people at certain times when they need them, or like I was saying before, the ability for somebody to take control that is less than perfect and less than amazing and less than pure, and is able to use that dictatorial power and monopoly on force for their own ends, and to keep and maintain control for themselves. And a lot of times, from what we see, we can see that a lot of the time that ends up leading to just on the other side of fascism. Sometimes.
Brilliant, yeah, and that's a really thorough and complete definition of the state, which I think is a really, really useful point to start off with. I think that one of the first things that, from an ML perspective, is that we always see the state through the lens of class. We always look at the class character of the state, and that's one of the most important things. I've just written down a couple of notes here, so if you don't mind if I just sort of read them off, because I really wanted to get everything perfect, in terms of explaining this, because
please, absolutely.
It's a tricky enough subject, and I am aware that there's probably a lot of people in the chat who maybe aren't Marxist-Leninists, and maybe they're a little bit confused about what the Marxist-Leninist position on the state is, and so I'd just like to do justice to this. So, from a Marxist-Leninist perspective, the state is the set of tools used by the ruling class, and in Ireland, in Canada, in the USA, that's the bourgeoisie, to repress and subdue the opposing class. Now, that's the proletariat, of course. The government is not the state, but the government can help steer the direction of the state. Examples of the state tools would include the police force and the military, as well as ideological apparatuses such as schools. Most of us live under the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, but MLs want to bring about a dictatorship of the proletariats. Now, that sounds scary to a lot of people. They'll hear a dictatorship of the proletariat and they'll be like, oh shit, it's going to be like fascism or something like this. So, we need to ask, how is this better? How is a dictatorship of the proletariat better? So what is the purpose of this proletarian state? What's the purpose of this dictatorship of the proletariat? The purpose of the proletarian state, like all states, is to repress and subdue the opposing class, in this case, the bourgeoisie. The purpose is to eliminate the bourgeoisie as a class by proletarianizing them, by forcing them to assimilate to the proletariat. And that means giving them jobs like everyone else, limiting their ability to exploit and accumulate capital, limiting inheritance, and things like that. Now, this process is going to take many, many decades, even centuries, and is impossible to complete fully while the world is ruled by imperialism or monopoly capitalism, and that's using Lenin's theory of imperialism there, which is significant. So, international proletarian revolution will eventually become a necessity to progress onto the next stage of historical development beyond socialism, which is communism. And that's important because a lot of people will look at the dictatorships proletariat in former socialist states, and they'll wonder, why didn't they get to communism? Why didn't they get there? And the real issue is that they weren't able to repress the bourgeoisie out of existence due to the international presence, the international rule of imperialism. There were capitalists all around them. So if you bring in communism, if you have a stateless, classless society, then of course the capitalists can come in from different countries, they can take over, and you're fecked, you know. So in short, the dictatorship of the proletariat will repress the bourgeoisie out of existence, thereby eliminating class distinctions and creating a classless society. Everyone's going to be proletariat. Though this can only happen when imperialism is defeated. Now, given that the state is a means of class rule and there are no longer any class distinctions left, the state will no longer be necessary under communism. So it will be forced to wither away to only the most basic of administrative functions. And this is how we create a stateless, classless society. And that's really, really important, you know. There will be no impetus, there'll be no need for a state once class distinctions are gone, okay? And that is how we get there. And it's important, you know, like, because we do, from a Marx-Lenin's perspective, we do look at the state historically, you know. We do look at the state as something that the bourgeoisie created, you know. In the case of our liberal bourgeois democracies or dictatorships of the bourgeoisie, we don't look at things from the other way, where we say the state's there and the state creates the bourgeoisie. We kind of look at it the opposite way, you know. The bourgeoisie create the state to reinforce and consolidate their power and stuff like that, okay? So there are some important differences to how different tendencies and political tendencies will view the state. And I'll just give you some examples here, like with the Social Democrats and how the Social Democrats would view a state. And the Marxist-Leninist perspective is, of course, quite different to the Social Democrats. Now, Social Democrats will generally see the state as a kind of neutral arbiter, detached from any class interests. They'll never look at the class interests of the state. And of course, this is demonstrably wrong, as we know that the state serves the interests of the rich. You know, rich people can basically do as they please without repercussions, while brutally repressing the poor and the marginalised. And sure, look, we saw this recently. You know, poor, you know, George Floyd and the likes, and you know, look at the classes of all these people who are locked up in prison, which is overwhelmingly poor and working class people. So Social Democrats don't really see that class character of the state, and that's really, really important to look at. And anarchists, of course, have a different perspective on the state, and as I said before, we kind of flip the positionality to anarchists. And from what I understand, and I could be wrong, so please correct me here, but anarchists tend to see the state as the source of the problems. The state creates the inequalities, creates the ruling class, reinforces unjustified hierarchies, and it's believed that by getting rid of the state, many, if not all, of these problems will be solved, or at least be able to be solved. However, you know, there's a problem here. I mentioned before that we really look at we really look at all these issues historically. You know, we look at these things through a historical lens, through the lens of historical materialism, and this is kind of an ahistorical analysis because, as I mentioned earlier, the state didn't create the problems created the state. That is, the bourgeoisie create the state to protect their interests, and that's why we have the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie at the moment. So if we abolish the state tomorrow, the bourgeoisie will still exist, and they're going to be able to create a new state in its place, you know. So they can just buy private military and security forces, and then by universalizing those across the entirety of the country or beyond, and using their wealth and resources, they just create a new state. So we end up back exactly where we were. We're back to square one, if that makes any sense in that regard. So so I would say that rather than abolishing the state, and this is kind of back to the Marxist-Leninist perspective here. So rather than abolishing the state and hoping that the bourgeoisie will wither away when we do that, actually we need to abolish the bourgeoisie through a dictatorship of the proletariat and then the state will finally be able to wither away, as there will no longer be the material conditions which would give rise to it. Does that make sense? Sorry if that
That
was. Does that kind of.
I love that argument, and that's fantastic.
Okay, good. I'm glad
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah. No, it
it made
clarifies it.
sense.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So there. Oh no, 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 not at all. Now I do have a couple of issues
Mm,
with what
mm,
you said, and it comes into what the anarchist position actually is. So
mm,
you're saying basically that the state is in your opinion, that anarchists believe that the state is the central cause of most, if not all, of the problems. They create hierarchy, power, and blah 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 blah.
mm,
I would actually say that that's not necessarily true.
mm,
Is the state the main problem? Well, no. Is capitalism the main problem? Well, no. I would actually say that the main problem is greed. Right.
mm,
The main problem is greed, and the main thing that's happening is that we're incentivizing greed to go into certain directions. So when anarchists talk about state and capitalism, we're not necessarily talking about two dissimilar things. We're talking about basically people's ability and tools that they use to gain and maintain power and control. Right, like I was
mm,
saying before, the exploiter versus the exploited relationship, and wherever you have that desire for power, wherever you have that desire to gain and maintain control, that's where you have the actual problem. So when it comes to an anarchist view, is it like we must abolish the state? Yes, we should. We must abolish capitalism? Yes, we should. But to do those things, we have most important things to realize is that yes, those capitalists are still going to exist after you abolish capitalism and after you abolish the state. What does it mean to abolish the state and capitalism?
mm,
But what the idea is to actually take away their ability to gain and maintain that control again. So what is the tool that everybody uses to gain and maintain control? Well, it's money, right? Money
mm,
and hierarchies are mainly the way that it works.
mm,
Actually tackle, because it's a construct that was created by human beings for human beings, is money. So basically the idea that anarchists have is that if we are able to abolish the state and capitalism and we take away the stick that they're using to beat us all with, take away that money, then it takes away their power, it takes away their ability to actually use that force, and makes them unable to gain more control again, specifically with this country. Right, the
mm.
capitalists within that country can be quelled if you take away their money. Right, it
Yep.
seems like a really simplistic concept, but basically that's the idea. And when you're talking about capitalists that are outside of the country, right,
Mm,
those issues would have to be taken care of by using the military, which anarchists have absolutely no problem with using. We
mm.
love the idea of using a military. It's just that we want to organize it in a different way from the ground,
Yeah.
using confederations and stuff like that. So
Mm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think
yeah,
it's a really balanced perspective on two, different perspectives. But there's a lot of overlap there, and I think that's
yeah,
really useful. And thank you so much for giving that anarcho-communist perspective on all these issues.
yeah.
It's great. And so I suppose the next thing where we might have some slightly different definitions would be on the term socialism. So do you want
Mhm.
to maybe jump in, or will I jump in first? I'm not sure what way you'd like to do it, but maybe with the anarchist definition of socialism versus the ML definition of socialism.
Yeah, sure. You go ahead and say your part, and then I'll jump
Okay, so now
in.
I'll try and just give a brief overview of my understanding of the anarchist position as well, and then you can kind of come in and refine and help correct, because I'm definitely going to mess some things up here.
Sure.
The first thing that I would say, I think it's really important to highlight whenever we talk about what socialism is and all these things. There is no consensus on the definition of socialism. There's about 12 different definitions, and it's useful to keep that in mind, because there's a lot of people who will say, oh, that's not socialism, that's not social. This has always been argued. This has been argued about for over 100 years, for over 150 years at this stage, So that's one thing to keep in mind. There's not necessarily one like correct answer to this question, but there are different perspectives on the question. Okay, so from what I understand, and I could be wrong here, as I said, the anarchist definition of socialism would emphasize the workers' direct ownership of the means of production. Now, of course, this is entirely possible under the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, under capitalism. For example, we'll see this most clearly in worker cooperatives. So that's kind of socialism on a small scale, but it's still existing within the capitalist system. Also, in the petty bourgeoisie or the middle class, are workers who own their own means of production. For example, small business owners who work, doctors and lawyers with their own private practices, etc. Does that mean they're socialists? No. Does this help the historical progression towards communism? Probably not. So there's some issues there. Although I will accept that maybe worker cooperatives and so on and so forth can have a progressive role in helping to build up the infrastructure for later on. I would, if people are curious about this question on worker cooperatives and stuff, I would direct people to Reform versus Revolution by Rosa Luxemburg. She really dives into that subject in great detail there. But the Marxist-Leninist definition of socialism sees it as a process of transition between capitalism and communism that spans an entire epoch. Okay, so that's really important. It's not something that just lasts a year or 5 years or 10 years. It's an entire epoch, just like capitalism. Think about how long capitalism's been around for, hundreds of years. And so socialism is going to last like this long as well. The ML definition emphasizes a strong, centrally planned economy wherein the commanding heights of the economy are controlled by the proletarian state under guidance of the dictatorship of the proletariat. My party, the Communist Party of Ireland's definition is that a socialist society is one in which publicly owned and controlled enterprises become the dominant form of ownership in the economy under a government made up of the organised working class. This need not exclude some forms of private ownership continuing to exist for some time. Economic planning is necessary in a socialist society to prevent the booms and slumps that are a persistent feature of capitalism. Centralised planning enables the best use to be made of the country's resources and the technical skills of its workers, and to protect the needs of the people as a whole. Socialism makes all economic, political, social and cultural areas of life subject to full democratic accountability with the active participation of the people. So that's really, really important. We do really want to emphasize that it is a process where the people are very much involved with it. It's very democratic, and I think things like the mass line and stuff like that would be very, very effective in making that kind of thing happen. And I really welcome that as an advancement in terms of Marxism-Leninism. And of course, there are good examples of this. Cuba is a very good example of this kind of society, this kind of socialist society in accordance with the Marxist-Leninist position. So I'm not sure if that makes sense, or if that sounds weird, or if that sounds revisionist, or if that sounds terrible. But Aaron, what are your thoughts on that? And maybe if you want to jump in and give the anarchist position on what socialism is, and where you might differ, and where there might be some similarities and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was a perfect thing to say, and also the thing that you said at the beginning about socialism having like 13 definitions. Yeah. I mean, basically anything you want. It can mean ham sandwich for what most people care. And nobody uses the term properly. Nobody uses it coherently. And whatever little in group that you're in, they're going to use it differently within that group. Typically, if I'm talking about I think what you're referring to is, are you referring to like a transitionary period, or are you talking about like the final stage? What aspect are you primarily referring to?
Well, this is tricky because obviously Marx kind of used the two interchangeably. Marx sort of talked about socialism and communism interchangeably, but he would have distinguished between lower and higher stage communism. And then sort of, with the Leninist tradition, he would have sort of separated, and lower stage communism would become socialism, and then of course higher stage communism would be communism. So what I was talking about there was the transitionary stage between capitalism and communism. Okay, so and that might be a difference as well, because maybe people will.
So lower stage communism.
Lower stage communism, we can say. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, and here's where I can actually topple a misconception about anarchism is that a lot of people say that anarchists don't believe in a transitionary period.
Mm.
Lenin, for all of the great work that he has done, did an incredible disservice to anarchists
Mm.
across the world when he made statements like that. I believe it was, because he didn't really like anarchists all that much, but he
Yeah,
poisoned the well
that's true.
big time when he said stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because a lot of anarchists do believe in a transitionary period. There's nothing that says in anarchism that you couldn't. Typically, when we're talking about a transitionary period, we want to do it in a way that is as democratically done as possible. Like I was saying at the top of the video, we want to make sure that the means that we use in our revolution are reflective of our ends, right?
Yeah.
And you can go through transitions in a lot of different ways. And I don't personally believe that you need to go down an authoritarian route to achieve any of those things. You just need to start working on getting rid of the elements that are counter to our revolutionary goals right now, such as private property, such as money, such as instituting dual power structures like worker cooperatives and housing cooperatives and that sort of thing.
Mm.
For example, Titoism, right?
Mm.
In the former Yugoslavia, you had a situation there where they tried to do a lot of different interesting things with their socialism. They tried to institute a very strong worker cooperative sector.
That's right.
They tried to decentralize to a certain point and confederate to a certain point, and give a certain amount of autonomy to each one of the countries that were in the former Yugoslavia. But they did a lot of really unwise things as well. For example, they kept a certain amount of certain capitalists were allowed to still own a certain amount of land, and they were still able to hire a certain amount of workers. And this left them open to capitalist invasion and a lot of different funding and stuff like that that ended up helping to topple their confederation. And that is where the anarchist perspective really would have helped in a situation like that, because
Mm.
through and they kept those things, private property and money. What they were doing was they were keeping those sticks that everybody is beating people over the head with, like I was talking about before. If they had gotten rid of those things, they may have had a stronger chance of actually holding their country together, because there wouldn't have been that corrosive element within that country that allowed for the capitalist takeover. Very similar during the socialist period with Soviet, they a lot of things as well, though they did transfer the property ownership from the aristocracy and from the elites of the time to that of the government. What they ended up fundamentally doing is changing the situation without actually changing the property relations themselves.
Mm.
So there was still an employer-employee relationship, right?
Yeah.
But instead of it being between us and a government worker. So, and those are the specific aspects that anarchism tries to tackle. Like I was saying before about really liking reviews and really liking how people break things down. This is one of the things that we talk about all the time, is that when we keep things like private property and money and the relationship to the means of production and things like that, the tools that the capitalists use to keep their boot on our throat, kept having an impossible time transitioning to socialism. It was like, let me go back on my notes a little bit here. We were talking about how in Marxist-Leninism, the idea is to take control of state power, right? Take
Mm.
control of the military, take control of the police, take control of the schools, use those things to our advantage.
Mm.
Why do we want to do that? Well, because we know that the aspects of the state that involve those things are extremely useful tools.
Mm.
But there are other tools that are in their right, like those things. If we're able to take away their tools and give us the tools that we need to take control, then we're going to have a lot easier time maintaining that control. And that's all about just building the dual power structures now and actually making the things that we want beforehand, so we have a better fighting chance at the end.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's basically the idea of an anarchist transition
Excellent. Yeah, it was a really, really good
now,
one.
right?
That
And direct action.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. That was a really good and really comprehensive answer there, and I think you addressed a lot of key points, and highlighting some of the similarities and differences there again. And Aaron, there's a question here in the chat which is actually very much related to this point and to pretty much everything you were talking about. So maybe if you'd like to address this, Morpho182 says, "Don't you think we need smaller states unlike the US or Russia for transition? The USSR's tendency to centralize was one of the main reasons of failure from my perspective." So what do you think of that, Aaron?
Yeah, like, okay, there were so many reasons why the USSR failed. And I would have to say that as far as internal pressures, that was a major one of them, obviously. But there were so many external pressures that it was like, I'm surprised the Soviet Union existed, and it's so neat that it did. Like, wow, what an amazing point in history.
Comrade.
But yeah, but like the social. Can you say the question one more time, please?
Yes. Don't you think we need smaller states, unlike the US, Russia, for
Right.
transition? The
Yeah.
USSR's tendency to centralize was one of the main reasons for failure, from my perspective.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So the smaller states idea, the smaller the better, as far as I'm concerned. But as far as I'm concerned, it shouldn't be smaller states. You can call it a state. You can call it whatever you want. I typically call them communities. To do, in my perspective, is set up the smallest local community that you possibly can. Russia had a similar thing known as the Bolsheviks, right? It was basically worker, or not necessarily worker, but coalitions of people in communities that were working together to obtain certain political goals. That was the idea of I believe that was the Bolshevik Party at the beginning. I might be messing up my words. Who knows?
Soviets.
Oh, Soviets. Sorry, Soviets.
Yeah.
Fuck sakes, I do that all the time. My bad. Okay. Now that I've lost the confidence of everybody in the chat, I will.
No, come on, you're killing it. You're doing a great job.
Yeah. Right, yeah, the Soviet, as in the Supreme Soviet, anyway, so they had a very similar thing. What we're talking about when we're looking at it through a democratic confederalist lens, which is the basic governmental principle of anarchism in a lot of different places, is that we want to have communities of, let's say, 100 people. The human brain is able to fully know and relate. Organizations of about 100 people organized together with a democratic council of people that are able to organize them and do that sort of thing. Those 100 people are able to confederate with other groups of 100 that are able to confederate with other groups that are slightly larger, and so forth and so on, until it ends up reaching a point where you can control an entire country. And doing that, you can still have the benefits of the centralized government, right, where you're able to take the control country and gear it towards a certain direction. But instead of it being done in an authoritative way, you can do it in a democratic way. And that's not very hard to do at all. And you would inevitably be doing something that the entire confederation would be more involved in, because they'd have a say in the matter, right? But instead of having it boiled down to smaller states, we would have it boiled down to the confederation or even the individual basis. And then that way we can not take care of the cracks in the road. We can fill those potholes. We can fix the neighbor's fence. We can make sure that all of the restaurants and all of the grocery stores are stocked with all of the things that we specifically need, without having central command dictate it, because the people on the ground know what they want and need the most. Nobody else knows what you need better than you do. So they're the ones that can make those decisions on the ground level. So it's like a redundancy, right? The people on the ground level make the decisions that are effective of the ground level, make decisions, well, or at least enact the decisions that were voted upon by the people on the ground level. And it's all an idea of working towards voting on policy rather than people. The people that enact the policy that you vote on are far less important, almost insignificant as compared to the policies themselves. So fuck politicians, fuck all of those things. You might have to have a certain amount of bureaucratic representation to enact the things that the people vote on. Opinion or a centralized body, and we can, because we can achieve all of those things without ever needing that at all. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really, really good and thorough answer to the question there as well. And I think moving forward as well, like with computers and with technological developments as well, that's going to probably streamline a lot of the bureaucratic elements that we would have experienced before.
Yeah.
I mean, what's to stop you, like voting on things like through your phone, through the apps on your phone or some stuff like that.
Yeah.
I'm not
well,
an expert. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I was just gonna say, like, what is one of the largest corporations on the face of the earth right now? Amazon, and they do almost everything over the internet, and it's done in a decentralized way. Each individual person picks and chooses what they want to buy. The groups that pick and choose what products they want to sell. All of it's done in a completely decentralized way, and it works perfectly. Well, not perfectly, but it works extremely well, and it's able to properly all across the entire world without having any central planning involved at all. It's all done by the people. So the models for what we're talking about are already in existence. And in fact, when people say, oh, well, the ideas of anarchism have always been unsuccessful, well, maybe when it comes to individual groups of workers trying to get together and fight against their bosses, maybe that's been unsuccessful to a certain extent. But the policies are not. The actual actions are in play every buying and selling things online. It's not 100% anarchist, obviously, but it's a good starting point. It's a good model to base things off of.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic, comrade. Brilliant. And I think we've sort of probably fairly thoroughly addressed the issue of socialism from the different perspectives. So I'd probably move on now to the third distinction that I would probably see between anarchists and communists. Not in all situations, but one of the big things that MLs will emphasize is historical materialism. So Marxist-Leninists will use historical materialism as our guiding principle, our guiding theoretical device, and we'll understand the progression of class society from, primitive communal society to slave society to feudalism to capitalism to socialism, the transitional stage you were talking about, to communism eventually. And I think that without that historical understanding of societal progression, we can run into many errors. For example, and this doesn't represent you, but you do see some people falling into the trap of primitivism. So they seek to sort of return to a kind of primitive communal society like we would have had, tens of thousands of years ago and stuff like that. But of course, there's nothing to stop that from progressing once more through the various historical stages of societal development. It simply winds back the clock. It winds the clock backwards and expects it to never progress, which is, of course, ahistorical and which causes people to sort of fall into all kinds of traps. I'm not sure what your perspective will be on that. I don't want to sort of assign anything to the anarcho-communist perspective, but I'd be interested to hear what your take on that is, because I actually don't know.
So like as far as looking at history and sorry, like as far as looking at history and analyzing it and basically coming with towards a better conclusion, that sort of thing.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, sorry, you did dip out for a second there, so I was just trying to. Okay, so yeah, we're doing something amazing. We're literally talking from one end of the world to the other. I am forever amazed that we can even do this.
It's incredible.
Okay, so yeah, it is. So as far as historical materialism, yeah, I mean, like leftism, reading and learning all about all of the, well, at least trying to read and learn all about the things that Marx and Lenin and Mao and all of those different people wrote and said, because I think that that's the most important place to start. There's no way in the world that I could come up with all of these ideas on my own. And without having read the theory in the first place. I know it's almost a meme, read your theory, but it's true. Like, of actual theory, then I wouldn't know what I was talking about. Right? Like, it's important for me to know how Lenin thought that the dictatorship of the proletariat would work, and then seeing it in action, and then seeing the goods, seeing the bads, and then coming away from that going, hey, now I have a full understanding of a great idea, how it was implemented, a possibly successful, maybe unsuccessful trial run of this thing. Hey, we've already beta tested this shit. This is awesome. Same thing goes with Maoism. Before it even had its name from Maoism, it was tried in Russia in proto forms. The idea itself is actually a somewhat anarchistic idea, I would say. Yeah. Some people would argue with me, but I don't really care. But it's a somewhat anarchistic idea that existed before Mao, and he was just able to give it a name, right? I don't even actually know if Mao named it the mass line, but it was that's what it was named.
So yeah.
But it was tried, it was tested, it was beta tested, it was proven to be successful, and we got to see the pros, we got to see the cons, and the great thing about that is that we got to see that specific line or that specific element of socialism tried in a bunch of different countries. So now, not only have we beta tested it, we have the alpha test, man. We've actually seen it succeed a bunch of times, and that's great, because that means that when we have a successful tactic, then we write why, we do a post-mortem, and then we find out how we can improve on that, because it doesn't mean that the dictatorship of the proletariat, in my view, is a bad idea. It's not necessarily a bad idea. I think that I have a video discussing the goods and the bads of that specific thing, and how we could go about moving forward in 2020 with the things that we have learned to actually create something better. That's the thing. I'm going to go on a bit of a rant here.
Please.
The main problem that we have, and Leninists and Maoists and anarchists and leftists in general, is that we are all, yes, theory is important, but we're all looking at this through the lens of we still exist in the 1800s and all of the same drama, blah, 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 exists. No, it doesn't. We have to look at 2020, 2021 soon, as the same way as we did back in those days. We have to take Marxism, maybe not Marxism, but our idea of communism or socialism, material conditions of 2020. And not only do we need to take into consideration the historical materialism when it comes to that, but we have to take into consideration the modern, today, realistic resources that we have at our fingertips to do those sorts of things. Back in the 1800s, they had the printing press and all of those things. Today, we have memes and online social media and all of these things. We are in a completely different place than we were back then. And even though I call myself an Irish Republican or an ML or whatever it is, the ideas that we have are looking at this problem, this socialist problem, through the lens of somebody that exists in 2020. And we shouldn't be dividing ourselves on these lines yet, because we don't even know whether or not this thing or that thing is going to work, or who's going to end up in control, or what's going to happen. Right now, we have to be applying that Marxism or that communism or that socialism to our current situation, while also taking in. That's where we need to be, and that's why we need to be having discussions like this. And that's why it'd be great if I got one of these days I'll have a discussion with Hakeem and stuff like that, and it'll be a fantastic time.
Yeah.
But that's where we need to be at. We need to get away from division. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, excellent. Yeah, and I'm really excited to hear that you're going to be talking to Hakeem, because yeah, he's absolutely fantastic, and he was a great guest to have on here last
Yeah.
Wednesday, and he's just such a lovely guy, and so intelligent and knowledgeable, and just off the cuff he'll know the answer to like any question you have. You can ask about the most specific, random, obscure thing that happened in, I don't know, Estonia in 1953, and he'll be just like, oh yeah, 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 Estonia 1953, okay, yeah, yeah. And he'll just like rattle off like this sort of, I don't know, Wikipedia page of information, and probably even deeper than that. And it's fantastic. So that's cool. I'm really really looking forward to seeing that.
Nice.
And yeah, so fantastic. I think you did a really really good job of answering those, and I think that's pretty much it with the differences. Those are the big differences that I could see anyway, in terms of, you know, Marxism, Leninism, and anarchism. Was there anything else that you thought of that, you know, there are some differences between us? I don't want to be just, you know, calling all the shots here, but was there anything else that you thought was worth mentioning, or worth bringing up before we move on to the next?
No, though, those are the most contentious issues, and they're the most prevalent ones. There are a lot of ancillary issues that some people bring up, like a lot of people try to label MLs as being class reductionists and those sorts of. And I hate arguments like that because it's so untrue to at least the. Of them have almost the exact same beliefs as I do,
Yeah,
minus a few, like I was saying, definition differences.
yeah,
Um, and usually when I talk to MLs, they're like, okay, well, anarchists don't believe that the army is a good idea, or that the military is a good idea, and that they want to just disband the military. And how are you going to take over the country if you don't take control of the military? And it's like, said that. Like, I have
yeah.
absolutely no problem with using the military. That's a fucking great idea. Let's yeah, let's use the military. You can't
Hell yeah.
do it in a way that reflects the goals that we seek, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that's the whole point that I stress all of the time, is that our revolutionary goals have to reflect the means that we use to obtain them,
Mm.
and they inevitably will. So if we use means that will take us down the path of authoritarianism in a very negative way, like
Mm.
I was saying before, then we should try to not do that, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, that's that's we have the problem with the state, the definitions, and yeah, materialism. Read your theory. Too many anarchists don't read theory. Reading theory is so important. Get out there and read some books, but do it at night when you have a nightlight. During the day, get out there and feed the homeless, talk to your neighbors, and do direct action. Because something else that Mao, I believe, said is that praxis informs theory and theory informs praxis, and you can't have one without the other. So get out there, get involved, get somebody, go read some theory, and yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, and you can say that to absolutely everybody, to Marxists, and left comms, or social whoever it might be. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
going to be really important advice for absolutely everybody.
Do
Fantastic. So,
social democrats have theory?
uh, I, that's a really good question, actually. I don't know. I suppose the historically Menshevism was, well. Anyway, that's probably kind of a more contentious issue there,
Yeah,
but
that's
probably
for, that
not.
for another time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's probably another conversation. Okay, yeah, fantastic. You did a really, really good job there of getting through all of those discussions, and I think we did it without, you know, spilling too much blood. I think that was productive and useful for everybody. So hopefully the people in the chat as well found this useful. And thanks very much for giving those key anarchistic perspectives on these issues. I really appreciate it.
Hello, hello, hello. Are you still there?
Yes, I am still here. Sorry,
Okay, good.
I basically just thanked you in the
Oh, no
last few
worries.
minutes there. Hopefully, the people in the chat were able to hear me in that last little bit there. Okay, so
Okay.
before we move on to the next question, which is going to be on left unity and areas of struggle where we can or should or even can't work together, and what we think about that, I'll just take a couple of questions from the chat. There's two big questions that have come up here. The first one I'm just going to take is from Red Dundorian. Paul, this is more a question for you. Thoughts on people adopting American analysis of white supremacy and thus doing stuff like tearing down statues of Irish heroes just because they're white? To my knowledge, Red, that's not happening at all. I've never ever heard of anybody tearing down a statue in Ireland just because they're white. There were some questions about whether or not we might take down the Sean Russell statue. because Sean Russell was an Irish Republican who had a checkered past, and he did a little bit of there was some slight collaboration with the Nazis, which was kind of well, it's a fairly big issue, but the rest of the stuff that he did was generally pretty solid. So it's a contentious issue amongst the entire political spectrum, from like far left to far right. You'll hear opposing points of view all across that spectrum. So, but certainly no, the tearing down statues thing isn't even really happening here in Ireland. There's definitely a discourse about it around the Sean Russell statue, but no, that's not happening at all. At least not to my knowledge. So yeah, I wouldn't be too worried about that. And then Ian McShay asks, and this one's for you, Aaron. So what would Aaron say to the point that democracy is authoritarian? If a majority of people agree to something democratically, that will shall be imposed on the minority authoritatively. Now, I'm not sure if you want to take that. I'm not sure if that's too spicy of a take, or too spicy of a question. Would you like to answer that?
I would love to. Yeah, absolutely. So
Great.
that unfortunately, I think that comment comes from a place of living within capitalist realism, or living within a sort of situation where all we've ever known is liberal democracy. Because when we think about democracy, we think about one form of democracy, right? We think about we think of representative democracy, or we think of the majority. What do you call that? I can't believe I just had a brain fart on that one. But basically, mob rule, right? There's two kinds of democracy: direct democracy or representative democracy. That's what it is. Think of direct democracy as being mob rule, and sometimes it absolutely can be. But the thing about it is that we don't need to use that of democracy single decision. That would be illogical. We don't use one form of math to determine what the outcome of any sort of set of numbers are, right? You can't subtract numbers by using long division. I don't know, maybe you can. I'm not very good with math, but you know what I'm saying. You need to use the right yeah, you need to use the right type of tool for the right type of job when it comes to that sort of thing. And is direct democracy sometimes mob rule? Different forms of democracy. Direct democracy, liquid democracy, vote weighing, ranked choice voting, and you can also have a certain amount of representative democracy if you think that is a useful thing. And there are a lot of other types of democracy that you can use as well. But those are the primary ones. And vote weighing. And those are the primary ones that I talk about. So in order to get rid of the problem of having a mob rule, the large small instituting their will. The way to get around that is by using vote weighing. Now, vote weighing, if you don't know, is basically the idea where the person or people that are the most affected directly by that law or rule or whatever it is are the ones that have the most say in what happens. So if a bridge is going to be built in some sort of area, then the people that are in that area will have the most say on where the bridge is going to go, what the bridge is going to look like, how the bridge is going to be built. Even more specifically, the people in going to be the ones that have to say on how the bridge is going to be built, but the building that bridge, how to build that bridge, so they would have the most say on how that bridge specifically will be constructed and created and that sort of thing. So all of these different levels boil down from the larger scale, right, down to the smaller scale, and all the way down to the individual person, so that each individual person is given the most of and all of those fancy, wonderful words as possible, while not infringing on the rights and freedoms or liberty, democracy, freedom, or anything like that of the other people that are in that community. So yeah, that's basically how that works. And like I was saying, you can not only use vote weighing, but you can use ranked choice voting. That can also that doesn't necessarily have to be in a representative democracy. That can be based off of voting on policies rather 5 different policies about the legalization of marijuana or the decriminalization or that sort of thing, then you can vote on the one that you like the best. And then your next one down can be the one that you like second best and third best and so forth. So that at the end of the day, the best possible policy is passed rather than the person. And if, and sorry for being long-winded here.
No.
If in fact you do need to have a representative in your democracy and you need to elect somebody to make decisions, that person that's making those decisions 100% responsible to the people that elected them, right? So they don't actually make policy or decisions. Usually they will just enact or enforce the policies and decisions that the people have already made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really, really good answer. And
yeah.
just, and yeah, take a breather after that. And Ian, Ian McShade, the person who asked it, says, totally understand and agree. And also interestingly, they said, what you're describing, Aaron, sounds like Cuba. So that's quite interesting. Yeah, very cool. Okay,
yeah,
brilliant.
a lot of great ideas from all across the world. Let's use them all, right? Let's try to use. I'm an atheist, but I take quotes from the Bible because I believe that they're sometimes good. And I believe Jesus said something along the lines of "test everything and hold on to the good." And I tested that phrase, and I'm holding on to it because it's good.
I love that. Fantastic. Brilliant. Come on, Aaron. Thank you very, very much. Okay, so let's jump into the next sort of big question here. I realized that, we've been talking for about an hour and 45 minutes. This is ridiculous. We've been talking for so long already.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Geez.
Crazy.
Time flies. I was having such a good time. I hope everybody's having a good time. I'm sorry if I've been long-winded.
Yeah, no, and likewise myself. I think I lectured for about 10 minutes when I was talking about the state earlier on, so I'm sorry about that. But yeah, no, we still have a good few viewers, so I think we're doing okay for the moment. Let's go ahead and jump into Left Unity. So on the document I sent you, with a few questions we'd agreed upon. There was question 5 and 6, but I think we can probably put the two of them together into one, and we can give our perspectives on them both together, because they're both basically surrounding this topic. So Aaron, what are your thoughts on the idea of left unity, and in what areas of struggle should we be trying to work together more?
Left unity. Yeah, I heard about that somewhere once. I think it sounded like a pretty good idea on paper, but I'm not sure if it would ever work in real life. So, obviously, we need to be able to unify, not only on the left either, right? We need to be unifying with all working people.
Yeah.
I have a video coming out. If you notice, I kept derailing the conversation and talking about Yugoslavia. I have a video coming out about Yugoslavia in the next couple of days.
Great.
And one of the main things that ended up destroying the solidarity and unity with people during that time was basically the ability of the people and differences and that sort of thing that people had, and exploit them to a point where people just completely dehumanized each other. And that's why we need to work so hard against that right now, because the most important thing we need, the most important tool that we have, is our numbers, right? And being together and being organized and being unified. And anarchists, even though we're making a hell of a fucking statement in the streets, right? We're doing a great job, and the ground, every one of my every one of the troops, I thank you, and you're doing a great service. But that's not enough, right? We need to be working with the MLs who are working really hard every day to learn theory and to help their communities. We need to be working with the Maoists who are doing the same thing. We need to be working with the democratic socialists who have an incredibly large base of support right now because of the rise of Bernie Sanders and that sort of thing. And we even have to work. But we have to work with each other, right? We have to get together and we have to involve ourselves in anything that we can, because right now, building those bonds and building those united fronts is how we actually gain a foothold, and we actually move that Overton window back to the left. if people in your area are a bunch of crazy, bright-eyed ideological leftists who radically want you to have equality, a living wage, or a livable a standard of living that's much higher than what you have now, and all of these things, and the other side is offering you authoritarian, well, you know what I'm saying, is
Yeah, yeah.
offering you a boot on your throat by a fucking masked police fascist, right? Then who are they going to choose? They're going
Yeah.
to choose the people that are offering them to feed their hearts, minds, and bellies, and not the people that are feeding them bullets. So,
Yep.
only important for us to use, purely as a tool for us to be able to gain the things that we so desperately need, not only to save our personal selves, but to save the world from the impending doom that capitalism has brought upon us. Climate change, everything.
Mm.
So we need leftist unity. We don't just want leftist unity. It's not like a good idea. It's like, you're not willing to play ball, then get out of the way, because if you don't, we are going to die. So that's where we're at this point. Sorry to go a little bit dark there.
No, no, no. You're totally right, and you really did emphasize that. Like at this moment in time, that is where we're at. We can't pretend. We can't just like LARP and pretend we're in like the sort of 1910s, 1915, 1916,
Mm-hmm.
1917 Russia or something like that. And there's these really stark divisions between anarchists and MLs or whatever it might be. We're not there yet, and there's so much we do agree on where we are right now from
Mm-hmm.
where we're at. There's so many things, especially in terms of the transformative reforms before we get to the revolutionary stage, like because there's a whole number of reforms that we need to win before we're going to be able to have a revolution. There's a lot of work to be done, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of immediate things that we would really agree with, we would really agree upon. And we talked a little bit earlier on about the things that we would agree upon, trying to eradicate, like, racism and LGBTQ phobia and sexism and all these sorts of things. And we definitely should be working together in these kinds of areas. Now, that being said, I do think that probably when it comes to the revolutionary stuff, like the actual, like we're here we go, we're having revolution, there probably will at that stage come to probably a fork in the road where we'll need to figure out which way we're going to go on that, and whether or not we want to be part of this revolution or part of that revolution. And I think at that
Mm-hmm.
stage, it would really behoove us to have fucking good relationships with each other.
Yeah.
Like I think,
No shit.
like no matter which way people do go on that path, depending on whether they go ML, whether they go anarchist, whether they go whatever it might be, we need to fucking be keeping good relations, because we've seen what happens when we didn't. People get hurt. We don't want that. We don't want. So I think it's really important that we do have these sort of friendly, amicable working relationships with people all across the political spectrum, and just to avoid all that sort of nasty stuff that happened before. And yeah, I don't know. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, I think that sounds fantastic. I just hope that we're the ones that are still going to be in
Yeah, I hope
thing
so.
goes down, because those sorts of bonds and those sorts of relations are the utmost of important, because we can't start dehumanizing each other. We
Yeah,
can't start factionalizing, even if it feels like it's the right thing to do. Just don't do it. Just
yeah,
like if you have a disagreement with somebody, ideologically or whatever, agreement, sure, right? But
mm,
at the end of the day, you want to remember that this person is the one that's going to have your back. This person is going to be the
yeah,
one that stands arm to arm with,
definitely.
going to need their support, and they're going to need yours.
Yeah,
So yeah, we have to get away from this idea that we still have these same ideological bounds that we had 100 or longer years ago.
mm,
We don't know what everything is going to turn out like. We don't even know what the groups are going to be that come out at the end. We don't even know if we're going to be part of that, right? It might end
yep.
up going fully nationalist and then march us directly into the pits of hell. Who fucking knows what's going to happen?
Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah, you're right. I mean, it could
There
go
is
either
no
way.
need to speculate.
Yeah, yeah,
It could. It absolutely could. After the fall of Rome, there was 1,000 years of feudalism. There, we could end up with that, but then climate change destroys the entire world. That's why it's so imperative that we work together. Stop talking about how we're going to eventually have to do some sort of civil war. We all fucking know. We all know that this might end up happening. I
Yeah,
don't want to talk about that right now. Right now, I want to
fuck
talk
that.
about how we can actually win.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hell yeah, I completely agree with that. And absolutely, we're absolutely fighting side by side. I mean, anyone who's involved in real life activism knows that, like, when you're out there and you're fucking fighting fascists on the road, on the streets, like, we're standing arm to arm. We're like, I've got your back, you've got my back. There's no fucking doubt about it. We are united against fascism, and like, we do have so many common enemies that we can stand together with. Let's fucking do that while we can. Without denying the real differences that do exist and the real end goals. But let's just do what we can to try and work together, and to have each other's backs and to maintain these good, strong, solid relationships with each other. While we're here and while we fucking can, while we can do something about it, while we can maybe shift a trajectory in a more friendly direction while we're here, before things get like too late, before it's too late to change things, and the seeds of division have been sown and things have gotten really, really bad. And yeah, let's just remember that we're all kind of loosely fighting for many of the same things.
That's right.
Yeah,
I completely agree. I have nothing to add to that. That's perfect.
Great. So there we go. That was lovely. That was really, really nice. There's a comment here from Anarkiddie, which I think is very, very nice. Anarkiddie has said, "This is such a great informative conversation. Thanks to you both. And NBs are valid. Dab," which I think is great. Little dab emoji.
Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic.
That's awesome. Yeah, NBs are valid. Absolutely.
Yeah, of course.
Trans rights, NBs are valid. And you know what? Yeah, fuck me, man. It's so stupid. Like all of these, and you know what? Here's me using ableist language. I don't even mean to do that. It's just like, I mean,
Yeah, we all do. Unfortunately, sometimes we slip up and
so
so on, but
frustrating,
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the last ones that, well, not one of the last ones. It's one of the last ones that I've noticed that I'm still trying to work on.
Yeah.
But we need to get away from this whole bullshit of always othering each other and making out as though we are different factions and all of these things. That's the primary way that they destroy us, right? It's so old. It's the oldest thing in the world. They always make the people on the West Coast fight the people on the East. The people that are on the ocean, or that are at the are in the farms fighting the people that are in the city, the people that are young versus the people that are old. All of these things. It's so ancient. It goes back to the Roman times. They will divide and conquer you, and you have to be knowledgeable of that, and you have to be trying to work towards a unity among all working people. We're all in this together, and we need to get rid of the exploiter-exploited relationship.
Yeah, really good. And I really like how you highlighted the working class unity, because I think that's probably even more important than even what we might call left unity. Like, really, that workers' unity, proletarian unity, which is really, really important. Maybe for people who aren't even as politically aware, but they feel it.
It's so much harder.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, fantastic, brilliant. Thank you so much, comrade. We have another question here, which we're sort of coming to the end, of the stream. So maybe just for anyone in the chat, if you have any final questions, just pop them into the chat box there, and maybe we'll answer a few more questions, and then we'll probably finish up in the next few minutes. Is that okay with you, Aaron? Or
oh, that's perfect.
Yeah, great. Okay,
yeah, absolutely. I love it.
Fantastic. Okay, so a couple of questions here. I'm not sure if you've read this book. This book is kind of next on my reading list here. Thoughts on the book Settlers by Jay Sakai. I've read a little bit about it. I've read some of the articles written by Jay Sakai, and I would say that there are some issues that I would have. I mean, I would disagree with Jay Sakai's perspective on China. I would, he sort of describes, to my knowledge anyway, he sort of describes how there's sort of these different strata of the proletariat which are sort of in conflict with each other. There's the settlers and the colonized people and so on and so forth, which intuitively is something that makes a lot of sense to me as a person in Ireland, with the indigenous Irish people, and then the settler colonizers, the Ulster Irish generally. So it's something that intuitively makes a lot of sense to me, in that these settlers can kind of take this position of being basically being the labor aristocracy, So their interests might be opposed to people in lower strata of the working class. It's not to say that they aren't working class. There are members of the working class who are um, obviously settlers or settler colonizers or whatever. But yeah, there are definitely some intra-class antagonisms which I think do need to be settled and resolved. And I'm interested. I'm really looking forward to reading the text, but unfortunately, I haven't just yet. Aaron, have you read this text yet or read about it?
Yeah, I didn't read the whole thing. I read a little bit. I believe you cut out a little bit, but it's basically the basic premise, I believe, was something along the lines of that all of the white people, that sort of thing, they're not working class. They're basically petty bourgeois because they have a lot of land holdings and money and that sort of thing. Was that basically the premise?
I believe so. Yeah, I think that's. I mean, I think that's the sort of title, isn't it? Like the myth of the white proletariat, or something like that. Is
Yeah.
maybe I'm wrong with that, but um,
So I think that's like now I haven't read the full text. I did read a little bit of it, but I'm so busy. But I did read a little bit of the beginning, and I understood the argument. And if I am, then I'm sorry.
mm,
Um, but I think that uh, to a certain extent, that is very true. A lot of the people that came to America in the first place were a kind of an aristocracy, but there was also a lot of people that weren't. There were a lot of people that, for the longest time, were working class, white people, right? And they had to try very hard to get certain things, right? You remember that when the settlers came over, they were offered this acres of land. And for every servant that you have, you would get X amount more acres of land. So a lot of these rich people were coming down with servants, and these servants were working class people in England. Maybe they're better off than the Native Americans or the slaves or whatever.
mm,
Obviously, they were. Um, but they were working class people from England and Europe and stuff like that came down to basically be the help of a lot of these people. So there was a certain contingency of working class people. But even if we were to say that there was, what can happen over time is that the people in power can find a way to exploit and erode the rights of the people that are around. So even if they were petty bourgeois, at the time when the colonies were founded, they had slaves, right?
mm,
Slavery was abolished. Well, you got to find a way to get your workers somehow, and you ain't working yourself, right? So, yes, they created a prison slave industrial complex. There is definitely that. The new Jim Crow, they still haven't stopped enslaving black people. They're more enslaved now than ever before.
yeah,
People too, right? And they started to enslave everybody using wage labor and the erosion of rights and that sort of thing. So even though there may not have been a working class before, there is certainly a working class now. They just the working class whites are vastly more privileged or are born with more privilege than the black people. Yeah, just by a simple fact of that they don't have land. They weren't the redlanding districts, gerrymandering, blah 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 blah. The list goes
mm,
to transfer. So that's
mm.
my opinion on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really, really useful perspective on the issue. Now, as I said, I haven't read this. I've only read articles sort of about this by J. Sky, by the author. But for me, it would be more accurate not to say that there's no white proletariat, but to say that the proletariat, that the white people are occupy a higher stratum of the proletariat. So they just have a higher position within the proletariat or within the working
Mm-hmm.
class. And that's not to deny that they are working class at all. So I think that's important because we need to be consistent with our class analysis here. And petty bourgeoisie has a little bit of a different meaning to what it seems to be ascribed from what I understand about that text there. And petty bourgeoisie, of course, are people who are the lowest level of the bourgeoisie. They have a dual class character of being both proletarian and bourgeoisie. They maybe, for example, they own some means of production, but they also work on them, like small business owners, a doctor, a lawyer who has a business practice or a private practice or something like that. So that has a very, very specific meaning, and I don't think we should be sort of diluting that. Even if there are real sort of antagonistic contradictions between certain strata of the proletariat which need to be addressed, which could well be the case, and I think there may be a good argument for that. So yeah, brilliant.
Hmm.
Great. So we'll take a couple more questions, and then I think we'll probably wrap things up a little bit here. Tankpunk, our best friend, has asked what our thoughts are on Maduro, and specifically for you, Aaron. Has Aaron watched Black Red Guard? So do you want to take that first, or will I?
To Oh yeah, yeah, sure. Everybody keeps telling me to check out Black Red Card. I keep meaning to, and I just never have the time.
It's
And
great.
every time I have downtime, I'm usually playing like some stupid video game or something like that. So, but yeah, no, I have heard that he does some absolutely awesome content, and I'm super looking forward to checking out some of it. Is he a Maoist? I can't remember.
Yeah, that's right. He's a Marxist-Leninist Maoist from the US. He's excellent,
I love
excellent.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I because like I studied so much about Mao, and I respect a lot of the work that he had done,
Mm,
and I also appreciate the uh, relationship that Maoism had to the former Black Panther Party and a lot of the
yeah.
revolutionary struggle that happened in America. So yeah, Maoism is. If I wasn't an anarchist, if I would probably go down that path. But
Yep.
yeah, so the Venezuela is a country of a long line of countries where the United States has had all kinds of intervention for their own purposes. Right, we've seen that in Yugoslavia, Libya, Libya, a lot of the South American countries, Iran, Pakistan. The list goes on and on. And a lot of the time, what they'll do is they'll create, and it's not 100% America. Obviously, there are internal problems. There's
Mm,
the rampant inflation problem. Blah. But the thing is that America has its fingers in all kinds of pies all across the entire world, and not just America, but all of the Western powers. Um, and they like to manipulate and change things based on what their political goals are at the time. It might not be the president's specific goals; it's the deep state's goals. And yeah, I use some kind of I sometimes use right wing talking points, but the deep state is the thing, right? Like that exists. Like if you want to call it the with that. But they have specific goals. What those goals are exactly, I can't tell you 100%. But you know, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else, as George Carlin says. So when it comes to Maduro, I think that it's more of the same sort of thing that happened with Gaddafi, right?
mm,
He was a democratically elected person, and the United States is doing all that they can to fuck with that country because they're leftist absolutely hates, despises countries like that. They need everywhere to be a right wing authoritarian dictatorship because those are the easiest for them to control and manipulate. And when workers have control over a country, or at least even the idea of worker control over a country, then it has to be snuffed out or destroyed in any way possible. And
mm.
that's basically my view on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the resources as well, like oil and stuff like that. There's always some reason why they want to get access to these places. There's always some key resource. I mean, we just saw as well in Bolivia, where the U.S. sort of funded this right wing, these right wing dictators to take power and kick Evo Morales out of office as soon as China was helping Bolivia to basically get all this lithium out and have this as this nationalized product that they can sell to the rest of the world and stuff like that. So of course the US wants access to that, and so they just get in there and they have
Mm-hmm.
to overthrow him straight away. So there's always some material reason for these things happening, and yeah, I totally agree with that take. And yeah, Maduro, I think Maduro is probably the best example of a democratic socialist in the world, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
Because we often throw around the term like democratic socialist, but without really thinking about what that means. But I mean, he literally was a socialist who was democratically elected in, and I know he does give he pays lip service to Trotsky and stuff like that. So, but I won't hold it against him because because he does have a strong anti-imperialist stance, and I think that's really, really important. So I'd absolutely give critical support to Maduro and his gang. Although I would have, of course, some
Yeah.
criticisms of that, and especially like coming from the left. But I'm not going to air them here, because it's kind of like when we talked earlier on, like with like the USSR and stuff like that. We're always hearing this negative and bad stuff about these socialist experiments, or at least attempts to move towards socialism. That it's really not. It doesn't really help the movement for us to be sort of taking it down a peg in sort of publicy kind of spaces like this. Do you know what I mean? So, but if anyone does want to hear like a left wing critique of
Yeah.
them, then I definitely recommend having a look into the Communist Party of Venezuela and hearing what they have to say about the the revolution and Chavismo and all of these things. And yeah, you can definitely get that left wing critique of the situation, a nuanced left wing critique of the situation, which is quite useful. So we talked about Maduro. There was another thing.
Absolutely.
What was the other thing that was asked? I can't remember. Black Red Guard. Black Red Guard. Okay, yeah.
Oh. Oh yeah. Right.
Yeah, we talked about that. Okay, and that was specifically towards you, because I've already talked about how great Black Red Guard is. Okay, let me see if there's anything else here. We might take one final question. There is one question which I don't know might be too specific, but it is directed towards you, and it is: what does Aaron think about the GPCR, the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution? And I mean, you've talked a little bit about Maoism. I wonder, do you have any thoughts on the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, or does that sort of set off anything in your head? Do you have any? Does anything come to mind when I say that?
Okay, so now if you're talking about a specific incident that happened, the name sounds familiar, but it's eluding me. But if you're talking about a cultural revolution in general, the kind that happened in Soviet Union, or that happened in Maoist China,
Yeah, I think that's the big one. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so the idea is basically that capitalism has created a within the economic sphere, but also monopolized and marketized the arts and culture and everything like that as well. So if I'm explaining, I hope I'm explaining this properly, because I might not be. But the idea of the Cultural Revolution is to basically go against that. So you want to create like socialist works of art and socialist media, socialist propaganda, to kind of counter the American version, eliminating a lot of the old elements of the previous state as well. Am I kind of on the right path there?
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. I think one of the key points is
Okay.
that when we talk about the transition into socialism, we're changing the economic base, but of course, there's the whole superstructure that needs to be changed as well and transformed as
Right.
well. So it's that transformation of the superstructure, which I think is really, really important and a really valid and useful idea. But of course, as with all these things, there would have been excesses and challenges and difficulties along the way, which I think we could probably talk about all day, but it might not it might not be a good
Yeah.
conversation to go down here. Um, yeah, just looking at like the remains and stuff like that. I'm just seeing pictures of like the remains, the deaths and everything. But anyway, that's kind of a slight tangent
Yeah.
there. Um, so yeah,
So that's the thing, right? Is that when you couple it with mass murder and death and well, not an ethnic cleansing, but a political cleansing,
mm,
is essentially what you're talking about. Then yeah, that's fucked up. And like I said before, the means that you use to achieve your revolution are inevitably going to be the ends that you wind up with. And if you start off with genocide, then where do you think that's going to
yeah,
means that the certain elements that exist within capitalism are still there, right? Like the thought process of even in the language, right? Like we have gambling terms that have evolved from like the 1800s, and uh, like like we use slang terms and stuff in relation to money. Get that paper, get that bread, like all of these things.
yeah, we do.
Like it's so deeply ingrained in our thought process that to get rid of that, I don't know, I think Redbeard said that once, and I like the way it sounded. Um, the way to get that out, it's a long, hard process that's going to take an extremely long time. Is the best way to do that killing people? No, fuck's sakes. We're fucking we're civilized human beings. We can come up with ways to do things that don't involve mass murder or genocide or anything like that. And we went down that path, and it led to tyranny. It led to all kinds of problems. And if you look at it is being eroded by capitalism from the inside and out, just like Yugoslavia, just like Venezuela, just like a lot of different places. So we have to. So it's almost like it was unnecessary to do all that kind of stuff, and that's why I talk so much about taking away the stick that they used to beat us with. Because if we take away that stick, then we don't have to kill the people, right? We just have to remove their stick. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. I don't know, but it's a lot better. It has a first before we go down the path of fucking genocide.
Yeah. Like, I'm sure a lot of the MLMs in the chat are upset to hear that when they're interested in their protracted People's War, and they're talking about like the Peruvian Communist Party in Gonzalo, and like, well,
Oh
70,000
no,
people.
yeah. Like, okay, like protracted people's war. Like again, another idea that's an extremely good idea, but it has to be used in a proper context at the right
Yeah,
time,
yeah,
right? When
I
Mao
agree.
was
Yeah,
talking about a protracted people's war, he was talking about fighting, and to a lesser extent the civil war that they were having with the nationalists, and that has been expounded upon by a lot of other socialist groups, and now almost anything is considered a protracted people's war. But the idea, right, is not trying to do an ethnic cleansing or a genocide or whatever. The idea is that these were people that were invaded and they were fighting for their country. This wasn't a sort of thing like that, right? So
mm.
yeah, it's so much more complicated than just but the context in which that war was happening is so much more important than just arguing whether or not we need to whatever do X thing. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. I have to just while we're on the subject here, though. I have to. I'm gonna have to send you over the general political line of the Communist Party of Peru, because there's a lot of fetishization of blood in it. I'm just thinking there's this one little very short paragraph in it that it says that thus the new power passing through the bloodbath develops the people's committees, which are being tempered in hard battles against the enemy, watered by the blood of the masses of peasants, of the fighters, and of militants. So watered by the blood of the masses
Mm-hmm.
of peasants, of the fighters, and the militants. And just for context,
Yeah.
Gonzalo was, and the PCP were really where Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, as we know it now today, that's where that really started. Before that, when people call themselves Maoists, they would have been what we would now call sort of ML, MZT, Mao Zedong thought now. So I think that's a useful thing to think about, and I think it's probably something that we probably do need to step back from a little bit, and maybe not fetishize violence so much, and just because we all love to make a nice guillotine joke here and there, and
Yeah,
especially
true.
especially when fucking Elon Musk is coming out and he's just like, oh, we're just gonna coup whoever we want and all this shit, and you're just like, yeah, we got the guillotine, you better run.
Yeah, exactly. I love dropping a guillotine meme once in a while. It's awesome, right? But
Yeah.
like yeah, like we don't. The fetishization of violence again is another thing that's ancient, right? If you want to fuck man, if you want to appeal to a group of people that have been tormented and antagonized and pressured and slaughtered in a lot of cases, right? In the case of the countries that you're talking about, there's slaughter. If you want to motivate those people towards an action, right,
Hmm.
and they just finished seeing their brother, their friend, their family member, their coworker, or whatever killed in front of them by these monsters, that kind of rhetoric works,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it motivates people towards that sort of thing. Something that I say every once in a while is that I'm not a very good anarchist. Rehabilitative justice, or punitive justice,
Hmm.
because I have a zero tolerance policy when it comes to rapists and child molesters
Yeah,
and
you do.
murderers and that sort of thing. As far as I'm concerned, every single one of those people should be marched to death. Is that a good thing?
Yeah.
No, because I
No, I agree.
that means that I can't that I don't have a coherent way to solve that problem that doesn't involve being more animalistic and more and that's why I shouldn't be the one that's in charge of those situations. I shouldn't be the one that's in charge of the military or in charge of the or, well, maybe not that part of the military, or in charge of prisons or imprisoning people or that sort of thing, because my default is fucking kill these guys. But we need
Yeah.
somebody better than me to be in those positions, right? We need
Yeah.
somebody that can actually treat the enemy or the people that are doing these things with kindness, with compassion, even though we don't want it,
Yeah.
because that's some people, that's how you make a difference. And sometimes people are unreachable, right?
Mm.
But a lot of the time they aren't. So, and that's why people like me can't be in a position where I would sentence people to death. Because if you're a child molester, then you're going to die. So other people have to be in that position, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to leave that to like therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists and people who really know how to
Yeah.
deal with these kind of things better than
Mhm.
us bloodthirsty tankies and anarkiddies who fight to the death on these streams.
Sorry.
Sorry, I think I might have cut out there.
Sorry. What was that last bit that you said? You dropped out.
I dropped out for a second. I was just being silly talking about us tankies and anarkiddies who are fighting to the death on streams. Never mind how we'd deal with an actual society.
Right. No doubt.
Yeah. All right, fantastic. There are some people asking questions about Yugoslavia as well in the chat. I just want to say, I think Aaron, I think you're releasing a video about former Yugoslavia soon. Is that correct? I think you mentioned
Yeah.
earlier. And when? When
I
is that
hope it
coming?
might. Oh, I'm trying. I'm Oh, sorry, you dropped out again there. Yeah, so my video that is coming out, it should be out in the next couple of days. I'm trying to set up a bit of a high-profile guest to be just doing like a quick little appearance on the show.
Cool.
If I'm able to get them, fantastic. If I'm not, that's totally fine. They're busy. But yeah, it should be out in the next couple of days, hopefully. And we're going to talk about a lot of things. It's not specifically about Yugoslavia. It touches on that. But it's more specifically about whether or not we want a civil war.
Hmm. Fantastic. Really looking forward to
Yeah.
seeing that. That's going to be great. And if people have any questions about Yugoslavia, I'd say next Thursday, I'm going to be having Ugopnik on the stream. So, if you have any questions, then that's probably a good time to jump into it, because we have been here for 2 hours and 20 minutes, and I think it's probably time to wrap things up. So
Yeah.
those questions,
Yeah.
I will come to those later, and I'm sure that our comrade Aaron is going to address many of those questions in his video that's coming out in the next few days, hopefully, and with a big special guests. So I suppose we'll probably wrap up there now. Comrade, is there anything that you'd like to do? Would you like to shout out anything? I'm not sure if you have any places where you'd like people to find you. Maybe if you have like a Patreon, if you have Twitter, all that kind of stuff, upcoming videos, whatever it is. If you want to plug anything, now's the best opportunity to do that.
Yeah, for sure. I don't usually plug my Patreon, but I will mention that just like Paul and a lot of the other people in our community, we do exclusively anti-capitalist material. And because of that, advertisers do not like touching any of our stuff. And most of the
Oh
time,
yeah,
our videos are demonetized or flagged and that sort of thing. So
yeah.
as far as how we're able to keep these shows in production and bringing them to you guys at a fairly regular basis, we do it through the support of our patrons, through the support of people like you, people that care and want to spread this kind of knowledge to everybody across the world. So if you think that the cause that we are doing is just and good, and it's something that you want to donate to, out on Patreon. Check out Paul, check out me, and anybody else that you really want to have their voices heard, because that's how we're able to stay afloat in a lot of cases. And as far as my channel goes, it's almost a full-time job at times. And if it wasn't for the money that I make on Patreon, it would be impossible for me to actually produce content the way that I do. So thank you very much to the patrons that are only subscribe to that. And you can also check me out on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @Professor Darwin. Don't ask. It's an old Twitter handle. I'm a boomer, so I don't know how to change it. And
I think there is a way.
and
I think there is a
yeah,
way.
well, I'm sure there's a way, but you
Yeah.
know what? It's been like that for so long. Fuck it. And you can also check me out on YouTube. Just Google search re-education, and after you go through all of the search results having to do with terrible, that's a nice little respite from all of that.
Fantastic, yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much, Aaron. And of course,
Thank you.
you can find links to this underneath in the description box below. I'm not sure if the link to the Patreon's there, but I definitely will put it in when I'm going back after this video. I'll just pop that into the description box. Thank you so much for coming on, comrade. I really really appreciate it. It was fantastic and enlightening, and you gave a lot of really really insightful perspectives on a diverse range of issues. And I really really appreciate you coming on here. And I'd like to do more of these in the future, so thank you so much. And let's do more. Let's do more of these things in the future because it was great.
Yes.
Definitely.
Absolutely. It's yeah. There's so many things to talk about that we could talk literally for 10 hours. So yeah, I would love to be on anytime. And if I ever do a live stream on my channel, I'll try to have you on. But live streams don't work well on my channel.
But yeah, I really appreciate it. This is the longest stream that I've done, actually, if you believe that. 2 hours and 23 minutes so far. The longest
Oh
stream.
wow.
Yeah, I think the longest stream I did so prior to this was probably maybe Hakeem. For about an hour and 45 minutes, but yeah, we're just flying through it at this stage. So yeah, time flies, I suppose, when you're having fun.
Damn.
Yeah. So thank you so
Definitely.
much.
Well, we got to have a drink sometime.
Definitely, yeah, yeah. Rather than doing a fight stream, let's do a pint stream and just get pissed.
Yeah.
We need that. We just need like a leftist pub, a leftist online virtual pub where we just hang out and talk shite and get drunk.
Oh, who better to do that? Oh my God, we got to do that. Okay, yes, that's
Yes.
how.
We're gonna make it happen, definitely. Fantastic.
All right.
All right.
Cool,
Thank you
man.
so
All right.
much.
Thank you so much for having me on, Paul. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I'm just gonna do a quick shout out to the people in the chat here, and then we'll wrap things up. Thank you so much to Lorcan Nagel, Socialism 101, Tank Punk, Gordozin, anyone, whatever, Anarkiddie, Ian McShay, Danman, 1950. And everybody else who's in the chat who I didn't call out there, Red Dorian and so on. Thanks so much for tuning in for the duration of this. Really, really appreciate it. And all the best, comrades, and make sure to enjoy the rest of your weekend. So I think we'll probably wrap up things there. And I think we'll probably call it a day. So cheers, comrades. Have a good one.
Bye.
I'm really, really